Myth or real, Nero. Presenting the figure of Nero is to talk about one of the most controversial emperors in Roman history. He is remembered both as a historical ruler and a mythical monster, known for his cruelties, but also for his attempts at reform and even his pursuit of a grand image. But the big question that always hovers over Nero is, was he really the tyrant that historical sources have portrayed? Or was his image manipulated by his enemies to create an absolute villain? Nero's story begins in 54 AD, when he ascended to the Roman throne after the death of his great-uncle, Emperor Claudius. Nero was only 16 years old and seemed destined to rule with wisdom and justice. In the first years of his reign, he was strongly influenced by figures such as Mother Agrippina and the Stoic philosopher Seneca. However, this did not last long. As time passed, Nero began to make increasingly controversial decisions, quickly shifting from the promise of a wise ruler to an emperor known for excesses. Initially, Nero was popular among the Roman people, seen as someone who cared about the needs of the population. But his image quickly changed, primarily due to his disastrous policies and his insatiable desire for power and luxury. He became known for his relentless pursuit of fame, wealth, and indulgence. His popularity plummeted even more after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, which ravaged the city for 6 days. Although historical records do not confirm that Nero was directly responsible for the fire, many rumors began to circulate, saying that he had ordered the fire to clear space for the construction of his grand residence, the Domus Aurea. It is said that Nero played his lyre while Rome burned. This image became part of the myth surrounding him, as if he were indifferent to the suffering of his own city. But did this really happen? Or is it just an exaggerated story? The fact is that, after the fire, Nero sought a scapegoat. He accused the Christians of causing the fire and initiated the first large-scale persecution against followers of Christ in the Roman Empire. Many Christians were tortured, crucified, and burned alive. These acts of cruelty marked Nero as one of the first great persecutors of Christians. After the fire, Nero dedicated himself to building his Domus Aurea, a monumental palace that was seen as a symbol of his selfishness and lack of sensitivity to the suffering of Rome. The project included artificial gardens, lakes, and even a colossal statue of Nero, which would be about 30 meters tall. But Nero's relationship with his mother, Agrippina, also deteriorated. She, who was one of the main figures responsible for his rise to power, began to be seen as a threat. In 59 AD, ordered the death of his mother. There are reports that he tried to kill her in several ways before finally succeeding. The violence and excesses of Nero did not stop there. He was responsible for a series of murders within his own family, including that of his wife Octavia. To marry Poppaea Sabina, Nero killed her, according to some sources, by violently assaulting her. The question that always lingers about Nero is, was he really as cruel as they say, or was his image distorted over time? It is possible that, in such a turbulent context as Rome, Nero's enemies, like the emperors of the Flavian dynasty, amplified his flaws and exaggerated his actions to justify his downfall. Over time, Nero's image as the Emperor of Fire became consolidated. However, was Nero's story distorted to serve political interests? Many believe that his image was crafted by his successors to legitimize the new regime. Nero, however, was a complex and contradictory ruler. At many points, he seemed to have good intentions, but could not handle power in a balanced way. Nero was not the only Roman emperor portrayed as a monster. Other rulers, such as Caligula and Domitian, are also remembered as tyrants. Caligula himself became famous for his madness and cruelty, being compared to Nero in many narratives. But were all of these rulers really as cruel as they are portrayed? Or were their stories exaggerated to feed fear in the empire? The comparisons between Nero and other tyrants, like Caligula, reveal how absolute power can corrupt and lead to insane actions. What we know is that Nero, like other Roman emperors, ended up becoming a symbol of what can happen when someone has absolute power. His extravagance, his relentless pursuit of fame, and his indifference to the suffering of others helped shape his image as a cruel and merciless ruler. After Nero's death, history continued to be written by his enemies. During the Flavian dynasty, the emperors who followed him sought to establish a narrative that his rise to power was the result of a moral crisis in Rome. They portrayed Nero as responsible for the empire's decline and its failures. This, in turn, helped consolidate the negative image of the emperor in subsequent generations. Nero's legacy is, to this day, a mixture of history and myth. While many of his actions can be verified through historical sources, many details of his life were distorted and exaggerated over the centuries. What we know is that, whether as a monster or a victim of history, Nero left an indelible mark on the collective imagination. His story has been reimagined in movies, books, and other forms of art, where he is often portrayed as the archetype of the cruel and tyrannical ruler. But was he really this monster? Or was his image distorted by those who defeated him? So the big question remains, was Nero really the tyrant that history tells us? Or was his image shaped over the centuries more by political interests than by his actual actions? This question still generates debates among historians. Many believe that, in a context of absolute power, Nero was a victim both of his own nature and the propaganda of his enemies. The figure of Nero continues to fascinate the world to this day. Whether as a cruel emperor or as a victim of his enemies' propaganda, he represents the thin line between history and myth. And you, what do you think? Was Nero really as cruel as they say? Or was his story distorted for political purposes? Leave your comment below. We want to hear your opinion. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and continue following videos that explore historical and mythical figures like this one. Because, in the end, the question never changes. Is it myth or reality?